All right, what I'd first like to address is that while he did give a partial description of what Jerry Brown's tax initiative would do, he doesn't give a full description of what Jerry Brown's full proposed budget would do. And one thing is, if you actually look at the budget and go to the governor's revised budget, which was recently revised in early May, the revised Brown budget makes no description on how the objective is to curtail tuition and fee increases and to lessen the pressure for students to take out student loans. Nor within his budget does he have any actual methods of how to do this. Also, the taxes which are going to be increased is deceptively a lot larger than you would seem. It is not just a slight tax increase on the upper class. When you compound the fact there'd be a rise in sales tax, there'd be a rise in the income tax, and also a rise in excise taxes, it's totaling a 10.2% total increase in taxes. Also, you admitted some of the various cuts that would come to other services, which are part of his revised tax, or part of his tax initiative and his budget plan. In an article from the LA Times about his plan to close the $16 billion budget gap, home care for the elderly and disabled is on the chopping block, and a proposed $225 million cut that would include a 7% shave from the AIDS hours. He would also push forward with his $1.3 billion in reduction to welfare and child care. He also, in the same article, he widened his earlier proposed cuts to include temporary reductions in court funding, including a delay in 38 construction projects. The proposal would force trial courts to dip into the reserve funds to pay their bills. And a quote from California Chief Justice Tani G. Cantil-Secoye, who called for an emergency meeting of judicial leaders, stated that the cuts would be devastating and disheartening. They would seriously compromise the public's access to the courts and our ability to provide equal access to justice to the state, she said in the statement. Now, the main focus of this tax initiative was to help solve a lot of the problems that there are with education, but you can't ignore the fact that cutting from other programs takes away from much necessary services. Our access to justice, I believe, is something that we all value, and taking away from that, and if the Chief Justice of California believes that we're going to be in a very bad position to serve that justice, then I do not think that should be cut from. Also, there'd be a $425.5 million cut in funding to the state gives to families to subsidize child care expenses. That would result in the loss of 29,600 child care slots. Now, I don't know what those parents would end up doing with their children, but that's mostly reserved for low-income families, and if they're not in school and they're not in child care, then where are you going to put them? The revised spending plan would cut Medi-Cal, the state's health care program for the poor, by $1.2 billion. That would include slicing funds for hospitals and nursing homes. This would also severely impact the poor, as you talked about earlier, how they're the ones who shouldn't have to shoulder the burden and should go to the rich. They're going to be hurting a lot from this new tax initiative. There would also be an $880 million cut to CalWORKS by changing from 4 years to 2 years to the amount of time adults can receive welfare payments if they do not meet the certain work requirements for those activities. And then lastly, there would be a $292 million cut to Cal Grants by increasing the minimum grade point average for students to qualify and reducing grants for students attending private or for-profit colleges and universities. This means that while the increase in the budget may help fill some of the funding gap, it also would take away from Cal Grants, which is a huge boon to many low-income students who are trying to get their education. And then also I'd like to address the point that Jerry Brown's taking education hostage. He has something called trigger cuts that come if this initiative doesn't pass. In a poll done by San Jose Mercury News, it said that if voters reject Brown's tax initiative, that 42% of people oppose his plan to automatically cut K-12 education. Also, I'd like to address the inherency of this budget problem. In another article from the LA Times, it said Brown, who promised voters while campaigning in 2010 that he would end years of budget trickery in Sacramento, acknowledged that he was relying on one-time revenues to handle one-time problems. Now, this sort of presents a redundancy in the problem of trying to fix the education problem, because this is not a long-term solution. If a one-time tax increase is used to solve a systemic problem in the California state education system, then why should we pick this tax plan? Why is this necessary if it's only going to be a short-term solution to a long-term problem? Raising taxes will not solve education. The cost of attending a four-year institution has increased six times in the past 30 years, and increased every year in that span. This is gathered from the National Center for Education Statistics, part of the U.S. Department of Education. Also gathered from the University of California Stat Finder, applicants, enrollments, and admissions in the CSU and UC schools have risen steadily as far back as the statistics go. And back to the trigger cuts, I'd like to talk about how Brown called for just over $6 billion in cuts, nearly all of it, $5.5 billion coming from K through 12 education and community colleges. UCs and CSUs would take a mid-year cut of $250 million. California Community College's chancellor Jack Scott said the cut of $300 million to the community colleges would be a breaking point for some community colleges and would cause many of them to close down. It's definitely not a good thing. It's definitely not something that you want to hold against the education system to just give your temporary tax hike. Deborah Brown, in an article for the San Francisco Chronicle, said that Californians already pay the highest sales tax in the country. Only Hawaii has a higher income tax rate for the affluent. Besides, it's not as if the rich aren't paying taxes. In 2009, the top 1% paid 39% of all income tax revenue. And then addressing once again onto just a short-term solution, the economic outlook projections, which he has outlined in his budget proposal, are relying on the national unemployment rate to continue to steadily decline. Now, if anyone has been following the news, the unemployment rate has not been lowering at the rate that anyone was projecting or at the rate that anyone wanted it to. So the fact that he's planning on these cuts to meet certain requirements based on that is some faulty math. Yes, and then also that's also a short-term solution. If you look at his revised budget, the revised budget only decreases the deficit for the next 5 years, but it will rise again after the proposed changes are returned. And then to the significance of the issue, if you look at the California State Constitution, Article 9, Section 9, Section A, it says that the University of California shall constitute a public trust to be administered by the existing corporation known as the Regents of the University of California with full powers of organization and government subject only to such legislative control as may be necessary to ensure the security of its funds and compliance with the laws and endowments of the university. This basically means that in the California State Constitution, they have no inherent obligation to fund higher education. That is all.